All right. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to Zoom. In an effort to make sure that we are able to deliver all of the information intended on this call and respond to all questions in a clear and uninterrupted manner, please make sure that your phone and or computer are muted and that you have turned off your computer's camera. To do this, hover over the bottom left-hand side of your screen and click mute and stop video. Once both have been turned off, you should see the visual located on this slide. Failure to take the step will enable us, as well as everyone on the call, to hear and or see you. Hopefully you've already done that, but if not, take a quick second to set that up right now. All right, and then I also ask that if you have questions, please hold them until the end. You will also have my email address that'll appear on the screen a couple of different times, as well as that of my administrative counterpart, Rachel McCluskey. So if we're not able to get to your question today, or it's something that you'd like to ask us personally, you can go ahead and send that to us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Good afternoon, and welcome to the LEAP Connect Sample ELA Constructed Response for grades 6 through 8 and 11 webinar. My name is Alice Garcia, and I'm the Special Populations Assessment Coordinator. I've created a sample CR for you to use when you're with your students to become more comfortable with the way these items are administered. So why should we practice the constructed response? First of all, the LEAP Connect ELA assessment contains one constructed response item per grade. The CRs require students to produce a permanent product in response to a prompt while using stimuli, templates, and TA guidance. The sample CRs that we've created give educators and students a chance to practice these items. They allow you to become more familiar with the process and how your students are going to adjust and adapt to that process. And then it also allows you to have the opportunity to see how your students are going to communicate and whether you need to create some additional supports or visuals to aid them in conveying their responses to you. So there's a couple different reasons why we're practicing the CRs. So before we actually start taking the test, before you start administering the sample items, there are a few things that you want to do. First thing is you want to go ahead and preview the item. You want to kind of, if you can, go through the motions of taking it as if you were a student. So have your directions for administration right there, as well as your stimuli cut out and ready to go, and kind of go through it, because it's going to give you step-by-step instructions and just kind of see how it goes. I had to do that myself in order to truly understand how to do this, because at first it seems very daunting, quite overwhelming. There's a lot of verbiage that you have to say and then a lot of steps. And until I went through it, it didn't really make sense. And then when I actually did it, I said, oh, okay, this makes sense. Each step has a purpose. Next thing you'll want to do is read the LEAP Connect Sample CR guidance. If that's not posted already, it should be posted any day now. And that kind of gives you some suggestions on how to use this. We do these same kind of guidance documents for all of our sample items for our traditional assessments as well, and our traditional practice items. And if you can, review the writing standards for the appropriate grade level, and you can find those through that link or by going to the Louisiana Believes website and looking up Louisiana Connectors, or even students with significant disabilities. Both of them will take you to the same area. So now let's take a look at our agenda. So today we hope to do a little overview. We're going to review the materials that are needed, talk about how to actually administer this sample item. We're going to troubleshoot there's two big issues that have come up with the CRs. So I'm going to talk to you about that, and then a wrap up, and I'm also going to give you a little list of resources that you can access to hopefully make the LEAP Connect a little more accessible to you and your students. So our overview. So why have a constructive response? First and foremost, all grade levels have writing standards. However, they all use the language of produce a permanent product. Little to no actual writing needs to be done to complete this item. I think that's probably the most important thing to consider, and why we keep calling it a constructed response and not necessarily a writing item or an essay or anything like that, because this constructed response is developed to work with students who use different forms of communication to get them to create a response. And we're going to go through that as we look at this. The CR has been designed, like I said, to make it accessible. It uses a script, guidance, visuals, a template, and TAs have the opportunity to review the DTA on the actual assessment and then the directions for administration on the sample item beforehand to prepare additional materials and supports. So that's why we're taking the time to go through this, is to kind of point out some areas where you really want to pay attention, especially if you have students who are going to require some additional things if they use, say, an alternative communication device. Lastly, at no time is a student required to put pen to paper to work on this item. So even though you're thinking in your head, well, my student can't physically hold a pen, your student might still be able to access this item. And so that's why we created the sample items, so that way you would see how that's possible or how you can make it possible. So when we do the actual assessment, the student will have the opportunity to earn these points. And then last but not least, this item is designed, as well as the Leap Connect itself, to work with a student's preferred mode of communication. So let's take a look at our connectors, the standards. Right now, I only have the ones for 6th, 8th, and 11th, but of course, 7th grade is in there too. I simply didn't have enough room on the screen. For all of these, the connectors are very similar. They use very similar language. As you can tell by looking at them, they're all about producing an informative, explanatory, permanent product, and that's going to be the focus of the constructive response for these grades. For the lower grades, the narrative. So really, honestly, at this grade level, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 11th, you could practice both CRs and find a lot of benefit with your students. But the main focus on these upper grades is creating that kind of essay style, meaning it's going to be informative or an explanatory product. And this is also why we banded them together, because the focus is more on this kind of essay style, this informational writing. If you look, though, each of these standards has the same language of guidance and support, organizing things, providing a concluding statement. You can basically go grade to grade and look at the numbers and see very similar language. And so that's why we put this together, and we were able to create the 2 different CRs for the 2 different grade bands. Now we're going to look at the materials that you're going to need. The first thing you're going to need is the Leap Connect sample constructive response directions for administration. Okay? And if this hasn't been posted yet, it should be posted any minute. We were just making some last-minute format changes. But this item, this document, and it's about 7 to 10 pages, has the exact wording of the items to be read by the TA, and I'm going to show you what that actually is, what you're actually going to read, and then it's going to give you instructions. It's going to give you a list of materials that you might need, and then it's going to have guidelines for how to present these items to the student. So it's going to tell you at specific moments, present card 1A, present card 2A, and it's even sometimes going to tell you what the card is depending on what grade level and what the actual item is. You download this from our assessment guidance library. Like I said, if it's not there at this very moment, it's because we're just putting some finishing touches on it, some editorial formatting things, and it should be uploaded any minute or any hour, really, at this point. All right, the next thing you're going to need, and it looks very similar to the directions for administration, but this is actually the sample constructed response stimuli. And this contains a graphic organizer, school activity cards, outside activity cards, school and outside activity cards, grammar and punctuation cards, and that particular one is the same one that you'll see for 3rd through 5th grade, and then our student response template. Okay, and that's actually where we're going to produce our permanent product. So you really want to make sure you have that. And on this one, because it is a little bit lengthier, like if the student is doing a little bit more than just constructing a story, the student response template goes over 2 pages. You may want to, like I said, review these items beforehand, because you may find that you want to cut them out. If you have students that have visual impairments, you might want to blow them up. You might even want to upload them if they use some sort of iPad or an alternative communication device that would allow for that. So that's why you really want to take some time to go ahead and do that. And you'll have the opportunity to do this on the operational test as well. Your student response template, as I mentioned, is the last 2 pages. It's the last 2. Actually, it's almost the last 2 pages of the writing stimuli. This is where you're going to produce the actual permanent product, okay? And the directions for administration are going to reference these specific stems. So it'll actually say, in this constructive response, I'll compare and contrast in the directions for administration, and have like a little blank to let you know that this is where the student would then either, if they could actually write it themselves, or they would dictate to you what to write. The the directions for administration is broken down, reflecting the stems so that you can go step by step and fill this out with the student and actually guide the student through it. And how much guidance kind of depends on the student. All right, let's dig into the administration. So again, make sure you have those 2 materials available. And just like on the actual assessment, you want to make sure that you have those stimuli materials. If for some reason you're doing the actual assessment and you don't have those, you need to stop and ask where they are. That's another reason why we created this 2 separate documents, so you would get used to that. You would say, okay, I should have 2 paper items in my hands at least to get going on this, because that's what I had on the sample. That must be what I need for the actual assessment. So again, your directions for administration. And on the actual assessment, they're called the directions for test administration. Sorry, let me move that off the screen. But since this isn't the test, I took off that initial, so that's why we're not calling it the directions for test administration. We're just calling it directions for administration. These are our step-by-step directions. And then you have the stimuli, which is where you're going to have your images, your template. And on the lower grades, it has an exemplar passage. On this one, it has a graphic organizer. And then one other thing I do want you to note is that if this was the actual assessment, the student response template would just be that, a template. You would put the final product in the computer itself. Okay, so that's really important. I think a lot of people didn't understand that when they were administering this test this past year. But hopefully, like I said, the new training that you had this week and then going through these sample items will make you a little more aware of what those stimuli materials were and how to use them, and then what the actual assessment has that's a little different. Okay, again, before you start, and I know you're feeling like, wait, didn't we already talk about this? It's because I'm really trying to train you all to say, okay, there's some things I need to do before I sit a student down and start administering even the sample item. So again, you want to read through your directions for administration and the stimuli. You want to see if you need to prepare those materials, whether you need to download them, whether you need to blow them up or you need to cut them out. If you need to create additional images, sometimes the directions for administration will say, if a student can come up with 2 ideas, you can. So in advance, you're going to want to ask, you want to go ahead and have those things ready. And then whether or not you have questions about format administration, you can go ahead and ask us about, shoot us an email. That's the cool thing about these sample items, is if you start working on them and you're saying, wait, I don't understand this, I think there might be a step missing or something of that nature, go ahead and shoot one of us an email and we'll figure it out. More than likely it's there, you just got to get used to how this works, and that's how we're practicing and going through it. All right, step 1. The first thing you can do once you open up that directions for administration is you're going to begin reading. And you're going to have 2 different kinds of print. You're going to have the standard print, which looks like this, and you're going to have the italics. The standard print is what you're going to read aloud to the student. So like in this case, you're going to say you're going to construct a written response that compares and contrasts activities someone would do inside and outside school. And then it tells you in the italics to present card 1A, which is the graphic organizer for compare and contrast. And that comes directly from your stimulus materials. So you would present that and then you would keep reading. First, you will plan your constructed response here. It's even going to tell you that you're going to point to, or you're going to move this, you're going to pull other cards in. Okay, so just keep following along and doing the steps as you see them. And that's why I think it's really important to kind of go through this process as if you were taking it, doing it yourself. So then that way you say, oh, okay, that's why I'm moving this one over here and why I'm pulling this one closer, or why I'm only covering up one little part of this one with another sheet of paper. It's going to make more sense once you actually go through it. So on these upper grades, we have our sample CR begins with a prompt, okay? And this explains exactly what the student is being asked to do. In this case, it's to compare and contrast 2 activities that a person does inside and outside school. Then it goes on to explain what that means. It finishes off by stating again what the student is to do. So that's what this whole area is right here. And this comes directly from the directions for administration. I did put a little note here. You may want to create images to go along with this prompt. On the lower grades, we provide the images for you. But in these upper grades, we actually leave that up to you. Because at this point, some students might require that support, some may not. But if you do think you have a student that requires it, this is where you go ahead and say, hey, I might actually want to create some images of bats and birds and talk about what that means to compare and contrast. One of the reasons why we don't include it is some people found those kind of exemplar images at these grade levels to be distracting, and the students would fixate and want to write about birds and bats instead of actually writing about the prompts, which the prompt for this one is you comparing and contrasting what happens inside and outside school. Okay, so continuing our administration, you're going to continue reading and following the directions that are written in the directions for administration. There will be moments when you will need to decide which directions to follow based on how much the student can contribute on their own. So for example, in this one, tell me one thing that describes an activity someone would do inside school. You're going to point to the space, and this is on your graphic organizer, inside school activity in the column on the left side of the card. And the student is going to be given, you're going to have two options. If the student actually provides a relevant activity, then you just move on to the next part, which is picking an activity that's an outside school activity. If the student doesn't respond, then you're going to actually pull the cards that have images, and I'll show you some of those in a little bit, and the student can just choose between one of the two images. So again, this kind of depends on how much support, how much that child is able to actually respond and do. So if you have a student that's pretty high functioning, and it could probably actually say, okay, this is something I do inside school, I do math, okay? You would just move on to that outside school activity. But if you have a student who maybe isn't able to think of something or needs that visual, you're going to have the visuals there to use. Kind of like I said, this is why it is really important to kind of go through it, familiarize yourself with the materials that are there, so then you know, okay, my student's not going to need these visuals. I'm not even going to show them to him because he's going to see them and he's only going to want to write about that. Where really, I know he could probably think of something on his own. All right, so continuing to follow the directions, and like I said, I was going to show you some of the images. So in this example, the student, again, had the opportunity to provide their own answer or to use the stimulus material. So here the student provided the answer. Here the student is using the stimulus material. So these are cards 4A and 5A, and this is an outside school activity. So the two visuals from stimulus materials are go to a park or ride in a car. So you would have these two cards now, and the student could indicate whichever option he prefers, and however they indicate this is however they communicate, whether they can actually point, whether they use eye gaze, whether they choose, like you say, okay, push green button if you want to say go to a park, push the red button if it's ride in a car. However you communicate, that's how they're going to let you know whatever response is the one that they want. Okay, and then you're going to actually take and write this in the graphic organizer. So this is just a little tiny screenshot of that piece of the graphic organizer. Okay, if you have the materials, you'll see what I mean. It has 3 columns, and this one's the column on the far right. All right, so continuing on step by step. The DTA continues the steps to fill out the graphic organizer, including adding details. So it kind of goes through where your student's going to pick the activities. The one for inside, the one for outside, and then an activity that's both inside and outside school. And then it's going to actually ask the student to elaborate, to give some details. And depending on how much your student can produce is going to kind of depend on how much detail is actually placed there. When we did the range finding for this summer, we saw a huge range of where students could produce quite a bit of detail or very little, or actually they really couldn't produce more than what was on the card. And that's okay. They could still earn points. And that's kind of the point of this, is to make sure that you're doing everything in your power to get your student to attempt this CR, so then that way they can at least earn some of the points. And that way they're also getting to attempt to learn and grasp the content that is measured with those writing standards. So for details, you're going to point to card 1A, and that would be the graphic organizer. Now that you've picked the activities, and this would be you reading this to the student, the activities people do inside or outside school, you can add more information about them. Present card A. So this is 8A. This is actually card 8A right here. Listen to this sentence. The young boy likes to read books at the library. The detail young boy tells the reader about the boy. The detail at the library makes it easier to picture a place. Using details makes your writing more clear. When you write, remember to use details to describe the activities. And I have had some people say that this kind of example would actually be a distractor for the students. So you do have the option of not using this if you think you could get your students to produce the detail on their own, or if you know, okay, just completing the sentence stem is a pretty big step, or maybe it is all my student can do the first time we do the CR, and we're going to work on details the next time. That's perfectly acceptable. And you don't have to give them, you don't have to present them with this example, especially like I said, if you have one of the students So the moment he sees this young boy reading a book at the library, his little essay is going to change to being about him. That's up to you. Again, where you know the student best is where you're going to make those decisions. All right, so our direction for administration, as I noted before, contains the sentence stems and gives you the instructions, and it matches the student response template. So as you go through the directions, you'll see that. For example, the introduction is stated before you finish the sentence and point to the lines of the first sentence starter on card 9A. So card 9A and card 10A actually refer to the student response template. In this constructed response, I will compare and contrast. And as you can see, this is something that you're going to read directly from the directions for administration, and it's on the student response template. Once more, the student doesn't actually have to write everything here. You could do it. You just want the student to dictate something to you. We have seen, like I said, where students went ahead and they were able to do it. You could even, if you wanted to reproduce the template on a computer, if your student's a little bit more comfortable typing in a computer, we saw a lot of students who that was actually a big motivator for them to actually get to type words into a computer. Even if they have crazy spelling, we can work with that for the actual assessment. So definitely let them practice if they're able to do that on the sample response item. All right, so after they've gone through the steps of organizing, so filling out that graphic organizer, they've added details, you're going to start the process of revising, okay? So the directions for administration include steps for editing and revising. So it actually has the scripted directions for how to and what to revise. And then it's going to take them into the editing phase, okay? Again, I just kind of want to state this at this point because it may seem like a lot, is you don't have to do this entire CR item in one sitting. You can break it up. Like one way I would probably break it up with students, and I'm thinking about some of the students that I've worked with in the past, is I might just do the organizing part first, where we fill out the graphic organizer. And with some students, I may have only done the selection of the activities. And then the next day I'm going to do the details. And then the next day after that, we're going to actually go ahead and put it on our graphic in our student response template. And then another day I'm going to revise it and edit it. So it kind of depends on you. This is, I think, part of the process that really needs to be practiced is how you're going to break that up, get your student used to that, and get your student used to the idea of revising. Because this is where a student can really display their creativity if they're a student that is functioning at a level where that's possible. Because you're going to be reading back what they told you or what they wrote, and you're going to be asking them things like, is there anything you want to change? And this is where we've seen some students get pretty creative, and you learn a lot about their personalities, the things that they come back with. Because sometimes when they don't have those visuals, they're able to get really creative and come up with some fun ideas. But of course, it depends on the student. Some students aren't cognitively able to do that. And that's perfectly fine. It's not necessary to actually get all the points on this assignment to do that. It's just giving them that opportunity to kind of revise in that way. To say, okay, I want to add more details. I want to change the name of my character, or change the name of, they could even change the activities that they selected. That's completely up to you. And how much you want them to do is where you're going to guide them. Like if you know your student is that capable and could kind of exhibit some of that creativity, this is where you can really have fun with them. If you're thinking in yourself, okay, I'm pretty proud that he was able to choose between the two activity cards, you might go through the step a little bit faster and say, okay, let's just see what we can do, right? And in addition to the revision part, you're going to have an opportunity, a scripted opportunity to practice with end punctuation. End punctuation is one of the things that is measured on the rubric. I'll show you that in a little bit. So I think that's one of the reasons why it is kind of scripted all in its own in the directions for administration. And this is done almost identical to the way it's done on the actual assessment, okay? So they're going to go through and you're going to present your student with this card. And this is just a little screenshot of card 11A. And you're going to cover the row showing the capital letters, because they don't actually need this, because just about everything on the student response template is a sentence stem. So they're getting that first part of the sentence and they're just finishing the sentence. So they don't actually have to worry about the capital letters. It's more that end punctuation that they're looking for. So you're going to say good sentences, use a period, exclamation point, or question mark at the end of each. Point to good communicators, use complete sentences. Okay, and we chose to use the word communicator instead of writers. So that way it opens it up to more students, and it doesn't just imply that only if you can put pen to paper are you able to create a complete sentence. That's not true. There's lots of other ways to create a complete sentence besides just with pen and paper. And then remember to use complete sentences, point to the period, and use correct punctuation. So that's when you're pointing at that is when you're actually saying that sentence. Then you would move this aside, bring back the student response template, and then start having them put in those punctuation. And earlier in the directions for administration, it'll actually tell you that when you read their sentences to them, to end with like an inflection in your voice. So then that way they hear that you're not actually pausing and ending the sentence. Okay, and it instructs you to do that. So hopefully they'll become aware of that. And if not, it's something that you might practice as part of your instruction. All right, the final step in administration is to read the completed response to the student, okay? So it says read CR. You're gonna point to cards 9 and 10A, that's a student response template. If the student makes revisions or edits as the constructor response is read, make the revisions or edits. So really there's technically a second round of revisions, but they don't have to make any changes at this point. Only read the final product once. Now that you've finished making your revisions and edits, I'll read your final product to you, and then it says read the final product to the student. The script and steps are very similar to the assessment. So like I said, this is nearly identical to the way that we've set up the actual assessment. The main difference, besides the prompt itself, is that the final product would be entered directly into the DRC testing platform. The final product is basically the student response template reproduced digitally in a fillable format. So you'll have like a paper version of a student response template that you can use with your student. But like I said, it kind of depends on the student. If the student is comfortable working directly with the computer, if the student uses only an alternative communication device, then you may not even have the paper. You'll just have the paper kind of off to the side because you will probably already have uploaded those materials into their device. But when it comes to the actual grading, we have to have the final product put into the computer. There were a lot of people when we were scoring these this past summer that we couldn't find where to put the final product. And they actually wrote that in the computer, and we didn't understand why that was the case. And I think what confused people is the student response template looks a lot like what you see on the computer screen, and that's intentional. It is basically the same thing. Okay, the sentence stems are in there and they're just going to fill it in. That's it. Okay, so just be aware of that as you're going through this process, that on the actual operational test, you'll have that final step of putting it into the computer, or even the student putting it into the computer. All right, scoring. This type of writing activity is best scored using the grade 6 writing rubric. That's kind of the prompt and script that I used for guidance to like create this one. Is I used a little bit of 6th and a little bit of 8th grade. I kind of put them together to create this. And then, but since this sample is for practice, it's not mandatory to score it. On the operational test, however, the CR items are hand scored by the test administration vendor, so they're sent off and scored in a central location. But if you would like to score this, you're going to want to use the rubrics that are found in the LEAP Connect Assessment Guide. And I've reproduced the 6th grade one here. And it breaks it down into the 3 sections: the organization, item development, and conventions. I'm going to talk more about that right here. Okay, so on the assessment, I'm going to break down the rubric for you. The CR is worth 9 points. That means 3 points for each category. 3 points for organization, 3 points for item development, 3 points for convention. And full evidence means that if they have all of these things, they get all 9 points. So really look at this and look to see what a student would need to get the full 3 points for organization. And then think back to our student response template. And I'm going to show you that in just a second about how the student response template is actually broken down. It's piece by piece, and each of those pieces, as they are filled in, is fulfilling one of the criteria on this rubric. Okay, so let's look at that. So for the organization, they are required to have an introduction. If you look here, an introduction that states the essay is about 2 opposing conditions. That's exactly, if the student fills in this, that's exactly what they're going to do here. Okay, I will compare and contrast the things people do inside school and outside school. They were actually even told in the prompt, so they're basically just restating the prompt. Then they need a body, and the body needs to include these things. One activity for each of the two opposing conditions. Inside school, this is something people do. Outside school, this is something people do. So there's that point right there. One activity common to both conditions. If we had the next page, you would see that that itself is a sentence stem, broken up the same way when people, they, inside and outside school, it has the blank when people, blank, they, blank, okay? They're scored on those pieces. And then I have a conclusion, which will be basically just restating the prompt, and there will be a sentence stem that'll actually prompt the student to do that very thing. So I think I'm really hoping people will notice is that if you're following the directions, using the student response template, students are even just picking one activity, like pointing at one picture, indicating one picture, doing something, they could still stand to earn a couple points. A couple points is better than a 0. Plus, we want to see them attempt the item. And yes, we know that at some point with some students, they can't do any of this. And we know that. They won't be able to do probably any part of Elite Connect. But there are a very large majority of students who can attempt to do these items, at least to a certain degree. And so we really want to make sure that you're giving them that opportunity. All right, so those students where you might have some obstacles when trying to access this item, okay? The first thing is if the student is nonverbal. Like I said, there isn't anything being assessed on this where it says the student has to talk to you, has to say exact words to you, not at all, okay? You can work with the student in their preferred communication modality. If you're the TA, and really more than likely you're the teacher, you work with the student, you understand how the student communicates, you're going to be already familiar with that. TA should review materials before administering to see what accommodations must be made. So it's something you're going to do in the sample, and you're going to also do when we do the summative in the spring. Is you're going to review, and you're going to say, okay, these are the kinds of things my student's going to need. My student uses a PES board. I need to go ahead and make sure that I have the correct little pictures for them to select to create sentences using their pictures. Or if they are using an iPad with a program that uses visuals, I need to have those uploaded to them. That way they can go and select it, and that's how he's going to convey to me what his response is for this constructive response. If they're going to use the stimuli, you may want to go ahead and copy it, and the stimuli, both on the sample item and on the actual test, can be copied and can be enlarged if you need it to be. So that way, and it can be used with eye gaze boards and things like that. That's why I said part of the reason why we created these sample items was to give you all the opportunity to practice doing that. So that way, when that operational test comes, you're going to say, I know exactly what I need to do. Where's the stimuli materials? I need to go ahead and get them, cut them out, blow them up, and get them ready. So that way my student has them on his board, or he has them uploaded into his little iPad so he's ready, okay? Student cannot physically write or type. Like I said, at no point did I say that we have to put pen to paper in order to complete this item. Review the materials, review the rubric, because like I said, those rubrics are very, very generous. For example, if they have more than one piece of end punctuation, they receive a point. So that means 2 periods, they receive a point. If you're going through the steps of where you say good communicators use complete sentences, and you're pointing out that period, just like the script tells you to do, students are going to eventually, they're going to understand, oh, I need to actually say, yeah, we need a period here, we need a period there. The script is going to help you go through that and prompt the student when that needs to happen, okay? Also, the student may point or indicate responses to their preferred communication modality, whatever that is, and the TA may scribe the entire response, however those are conveyed, on the student response template for the student. So you can write everything. If you're a teacher and you have an assistant in the classroom, and that the role that they typically, play in the classroom, that TA, your teaching assistant could be helping, or your para, for the sample item. When it comes to the actual operational test, it's something you'll need to discuss with the school test coordinator, but the scribe option is available. So you could still scribe everything that student is conveying to you as their response. All right. So as I get ready to wrap up, I'm going to give you just a couple more things, more like some dates and just some reminders, and then I'm going to show you a page of resources, and then I'll try to take some of your questions. So let's get to that. All right, so starting now, you're going to want to go ahead and work on these sample items. And there's just 2 because they are very long and involved. It takes a long time to actually make them. But I think once you administer one of them and you do it one time, you're going to feel much more comfortable than you do right now, probably listening to this presentation going, how am I supposed to do this? Like I said, once you do it once, you're going to feel a lot more comfortable and say, okay, I think I got this. Also, you all at this level have the advantage because you could use the one for 3 through 5 as well as this one to practice with your students. Of course, honestly, 3rd through 5th grade could use this item. It is just a little bit more elevated, so it kind of depends on the cognitive ability of that 3rd through 5th grader, whether they could access it. You're going to want to review the guidance for these items, which should be posted any minute now. Go ahead and use the Leap Connect OTT. You're going to want to use Google Chrome to access that, unless you already have the TRC icon on your desktop. Then you could just go and click on there and you should be able to see it. And that's an opportunity to play with all of the selected response items for both math and ELA, and we have it for different grades like 3rd, 4th grade. We have some from the middle school, and then we have some 11th grade items. If you're doing that, please make sure that you have downloaded the actual DTA, the Directions for Test Administration for the OTT, we like acronyms, and the reference materials. And again, we've set it up like that, so then that way when you do the actual summative in the spring, it won't feel as strange and unusual because you've already practiced using those materials with the online platform. And then do review the Leap Connect Assessment Guide, partly for those rubrics, but also to get any other kind of information that you may find in there. Some good stuff in there. So in January, you're going to receive your test administrator materials, and hopefully your school test coordinator or your district test coordinator is going to go ahead and give you your TA training. You will have a 2-week review period of those materials, and that's when you'll be able to go in and say, okay, oh, I remember, yeah, they're going to have to do that constructive response. And oh yeah, I know there's some visuals that I'm probably going to have to create, or I'm going to have to download or find some PS cards or something like that that's going to align with them. That's what I would do at this point. If I got that, the first thing I would do is go right to session 4, because that's where the constructive response is for all grades in ELA, and start looking for what kinds of materials I'm going to need to have available for my student in order to access that item. And then our assessment window, which is February 4th through March 15th, 2019. And then again, here are our email addresses. This is mine. So if you have questions about the content, how this is set up, about any of the writing in here, let me know. If you have questions about accommodations, Rachel is your gal. You're going to want to email her. And she's probably going to tell you that if it's an accommodation that you use regularly in the classroom, on the Leap Connect is so forgiving when it comes to accommodations, because we understand the different kinds of abilities that these students have who are taking this assessment. You're going to probably be able to use it with the student when giving them the actual assessment. But if you have questions, please feel free to email one of us. And then now I'm going to show you a list of resources. There's our assessment guide, achievement level descriptors, so when they get those student reports, you'll be able to understand what that means. The online tools training, there's a link again, our connectors. And then there's these pretty groovy little resources that are available that our SPED department created. You have essential element cards that kind of give you some ideas of how to design lessons around the connectors, and then how to adapt lessons for both ELA and math. These are actually so useful that I've shared them with teachers who don't necessarily work with students with significant disabilities. They're also ones who work like with English learners or struggling students, just because it kind of helps a teacher break it down. All right, so what I'm gonna do is take a look and see if I have any questions. Let me see what I got.